Hey guys, I'm not quite sure I'm worthy of that introduction. I'm just a kid from Canada who accidentally got involved with a school fundraiser, and it ended up being an amazing part of my life. So all I wanted to do here today is just to welcome you all to this amazing symposium on leadership. And I may not be an expert in leadership, but I guess I accidentally became one along the way, and I just want to share with you why I started becoming involved with what I cared about when I was 6, why I kept on going when I was a teenager, and why I continue today. So I would have started back, I'm 28 years now, so I'm getting up there, but it's in my grade 1 classroom, and I would have been 6. So there I am in the back. And one thing that I remember about life back in grade 1 was that it was very simple. I went to class, I tried not to tick off my teacher too much, and I waited for recess to happen. And that was it. And life was simple, and I enjoyed it that way. But one thing about my school every year is it was almost part of like a routine. Every year we had to do some kind of like fundraiser for charity or awareness for something. So we did things before when you were in kindergarten, like a canned food drive for people who didn't have food, and raise money for cancer research. And it was almost like part of the routine. We did something every year. This year, my teacher, her name was Mrs. Prest, and she said, okay, we're gonna do something a little different this year. We were in grade 1, and she brought on this long list and said, we're gonna fundraise money for kids your age who don't have the same things that you guys have in different parts of the world. So she went through this list and said like, 1 cent would buy a pencil, $2 would buy a blanket, $5 would buy 5 hot lunches, and all these things on it. And on that list, she said that $70 would buy a well. And she said that was important because there were kids our age who were 6 and 7 who couldn't go to school and sometimes even died because they didn't have access to clean water. And we didn't understand, like, at all. I think one of my classmates asked, like, excuse me, like, why don't they just go to the water fountain? You know, duh, problem solved, let's move on. And my teacher looked at us like children and said, no, that's not how that works. And she explained that sometimes kids our age didn't have water fountains at their homes or at their schools and had to walk a really far distance to go get it. And we had a really hard time grasping it. So we're asking our teacher, like, what do you mean? Like, how far do kids like us have to walk? And my teacher said 5 kilometers. That didn't help. What's 5 kilometers when you're 6? So she was trying to explain it to us, and she said, that's about 5,000 steps. Again, not super helpful, couldn't count that high. But I counted the steps it took me to get from my classroom to the water fountain, and I counted 10. And we just all came out of kindergarten at that time, like preschool kind of thing. And one of the things that was like forced upon us when we were in preschool was this idea of sharing, and that the classroom was like an equal, fair place. So when we heard that there were kids our age who couldn't even go to school because they had to go get water for their families and walk however many more steps that was from 10, it actually upset a lot of us in the class. Like we were upset because we felt we had been lied to. Like there was this big conspiracy and our teacher was holding in the facts, and like we were very upset. And my teacher kind of just, she shrugged and said, you know what? There's lots of things on this list, and if you wanted to help out with anything, you can raise money for something, and it will help. So we were deciding who would fundraise money for what on this list, like assigning parts of the fundraiser. And then the well came up. It was 70 Canadian dollars. It was the most expensive thing on the list. And I raised my hand and I said, I want to fundraise for that. And my teacher took a look at me and she kind of raised her eyebrows. And she said, are you sure, Ryan? Because I wasn't exactly at the top of the class. I don't think I was the bottom either. I was just kind of there, kind of like wallpaper. Like I didn't raise my hand, I didn't participate. I stood in the back and waited for class to be over so I could go have fun at recess. And so my teacher, I think she thought I either wasn't taking it seriously or I didn't know what I was signing up for. So she looked at me and she was like, Ryan, this is a big part of our fundraiser. Are you sure you can do it? And I said, don't worry, I have a plan. I'm going to go home to my parents. I'm going to ask them for $70. They're going to give it to me, and then I'll come back and give it to you. And I thought it was a great plan because I didn't want to buy something for myself. I think that was like way back when, but I remember it was like Game Boys were the hot thing back then. And I didn't want a Game Boy. I wanted money for something good, something virtuous. And my parents, I thought, would see that and say, oh my God, that's amazing, and reward me by giving me the money. So it made sense in my mind. I went home to my folks, and they were making dinner, and I said, Mom, Dad, I need $70 to build a well. There are kids in Africa that don't have clean water, and it's not fair. And my folks looked at me, and they kind of went like, ah, that's cute. No. And then kind of ignored me and went along making dinner. And I don't think they didn't care, but I was 6, and they thought I would just forget about it 5 minutes later. But every time I went and had a glass of water or a drink from the tap, like I reminded myself that another kid my age couldn't do that. So I pestered my folks about it for days and days, and I didn't let it go. And it got really bad, actually. It got to the point we were having a family dinner. It was a Sunday family dinner, and we were all sitting around the table, my 2 brothers, my parents, and I. And my mother especially, I thought she would listen, but she wasn't listening to me. So we had lots of rules in my house. Well, maybe not lots of rules, but one of the most important ones that we had was that we didn't point in my house. My mom always thought like pointing was like the most rude thing you could ever do, especially if you pointed at someone. So we got in big consequences if we ever pointed. But my mom wasn't listening to me, and so we were sitting at the dinner table, and I looked at her, and I pointed, and I said, you don't get it. Someone just died because they don't have clean water, and you didn't help them. I got a timeout, but my mom saw that I was serious, and I sat down with her after, and she said, Ryan, $70 is a lot of money for a 6-year-old, and we're not just going to give it to you, but if you're serious about it, you can do extra chores on top of the chores you already do. We'll give you something magical called an allowance, and then if you're serious about it, you can fundraise this allowance money up for this well. So I already had to do things like, make my bed, clear the table, like things a 6-year-old can help with. But now I was told I had to vacuum, wash windows, shovel snow. For those of you unfamiliar, that is not a fun thing to do. It is very heavy and it hurts your back. But I was able to do all these things in order to get an allowance. And I started working hard. And it was actually, the school fundraiser lasted for 40 days. And at that time, a few days had gone by, so I had a tight time frame to raise the $70. So I kept working hard. I got a few dollars here, a few dollars there. And then by the time the 40 days had gone by, I had raised the grand total of $25. And I don't think my teacher was surprised, but maybe just a little disappointed. But, whatever, life moved on. But I would have still been 6. And in my mind, I thought, if I could just get to $70, we would build a well, and then everyone in the world would have clean water. I was a little naive, but because I thought like that, I decided I was going to keep on going. I remember when I was in grade 1, we were always told, like, keep your commitments. If you set a goal, like, stay true to it and, find a way to succeed. So I decided to keep on doing chores. And I wrote a little story about what I was trying to do in my grade 1 class and dubbed it Ryan's Well. My handwriting hasn't improved very much, but I was trying my best. And it took a long time. It took what felt like an eternity. It took 4 months. And I talked with him, and he said, Ryan, you did a great job. You didn't give up, and you showed tenacity and perseverance. And you had an opportunity to quit, and no one would have held it against you, and you kept on going. And that's great, and you should feel proud of what you did. But it's okay to stop. I think like I would have just turned 7. And I think from his perspective, he saw it and he said, he thought, once I realized how big the world was, how complicated some of the problems are, that you can't fix them by doing chores around your house. And he thought I would be really jaded and cynical when I woke up to the reality that the world's a big, complicated place and we can't always have the impact that we want to do. So I had that talk with him. And I think what stuck with me is I had made that commitment. My commitment was to maybe not just raise the $70, but to build a well, and that was different. And I was going to keep on going until that well was built. So I kept doing chores. When that wasn't enough, I started doing chores for my neighbors. That was also not enough. So I went back to my class and started trying to talk to my friends, trying to get them involved. It was a very hard sell because my friends were 6 and 7. So I had to get a little creative, and I had my first ever fundraiser. It was a Pokemon card raffle. Something that had nothing to do with water, but sometimes if you're interested in something, you make it relevant to the people around you, your peers, and you make it engaging. And a few of my friends who wanted nothing to do with it, all of a sudden wanted everything to do with it. So we had a little fundraiser, and then I did a recess, like bump basketball tournament thing with a buy-in. And my teacher saw what I was doing and said, I can't believe you have an attention span that lasts this long, first of all. But why don't you give a presentation to the class about what you're trying to do? And I really didn't want to. I would have gone to speech therapy when I was 7, so I couldn't pronounce my words correctly. I stuttered things like F, SH, TH. Like I couldn't say words like thunder. I'd say tunder. And I used to stutter. So when I was trying to say something, it took me like 3 or 4 times to get it out when I was trying to have a conversation with someone. So to get up in front of the class and say something, I just really didn't want to do. But my mom had always said, like, you have to try to expand your comfort zone and do something that you wouldn't normally be able to do, and speak from the heart of why you're talking, and maybe people will listen. So I got up in front of my class, and I gave a speech. I think it was less than a minute long. A lot of the words did not get across, and it was bad. But I think my classmates saw that and they thought, if Ryan can do that, why can't I? And from that point on, it became less of my project and more of my entire class's project. And then my community, and then my school, and people from my neighborhood. And we were able to start fundraising money for the project. It wasn't just me anymore. And it still took a very long time, a lot of hard work, a lot of little fundraisers in my town. But almost a year later, we were able to raise $2,000. Yeah. So I had achieved my goal. I got myself invited to a board meeting with the organization that I was fundraising for with their local partner on the ground in Uganda, and got to talk with them to make sure I knew exactly where the well was going and things like that. I really wanted to make sure it went towards a school, because I was told that kids my age couldn't go to school, and maybe that would help, I thought. So it ended up going to a place in northern Uganda called Angola Primary School, and that school got the first water point it had ever had, actually. So it was great. The school enrollment actually even jumped from 700 to 1,400 students, just because the water point was put in. And I had achieved my goal. But I also realized then that one well would not, in fact, bring the world clean water. But there was a little bit of momentum, so I decided to keep on fundraising, keep on working, because one day I wanted to actually be able to go see the well, because the community there was very curious and intrigued, because they had been asking for a water point for a long time, and they had been expecting the government or a big aid organization to maybe come in and help with it. And when they heard that a 6-year-old had fundraised the money, they were curious, because in that culture, in that community more than anything, when you were a student, you were a student. You were encouraged to sit down and listen and wait until you became an adult to become a member of the community. But they took that as an opportunity to tell their students that they didn't have to wait. They could become members of the community while they were students. And they wanted me to always come to officially open the well. And that wasn't in the cards, but after a couple of years later, we were able to get a donation of air mile points from people who I had done chores for back in the day, who used to travel for work. And I was able to go and officially open the well. And it was kind of a crazy experience. It was kind of a crazy experience. I would have been 9, and I think I was in between grade 3 and grade 4. And they had always been expecting this. I went, and they had this big celebration at the school in honor of me coming to officially open the well, and there was over 5,000 people there from the community, and there was a feast and a celebration, and everyone was just so happy and so excited and so just like pumped because the school had clean water. You know, I don't have a smile that lights up on my face because I can have a bottle of water or a glass of water or a shower in the morning. So to see something that I considered so small and negligible to have that much of an impact on someone's life, it gave me motivation and perspective to just keep on going. So I came back to Canada and I was enthusiastic. I thought I was going to try to do as much as I could, so I started doing more and more speaking, more and more fundraisers, and I didn't really stop. Maybe I did a little too much, but I came back and I was invigorated, and it was on. I started speaking outside of my town to towns all over my province and then my country, and then it was a little radio interview here and a newspaper article. And then we got a call to the house one day from a television producer in the United States who had heard about what I was doing and wanted to see if I was good enough to be on their show. So they called my house, and then I talked to this producer on the phone for almost an hour and then hung up. And my parents asked me who had called. And I said something called the Oprah Winfrey Show. And my parents said, "Do you know what that is?" And I said, "No." You know, that was Arthur, Popular Mechanics for Kids, Magic School Bus, a few of them, I don't know. So my parents took me into the TV room. That was back in the day. We had an antenna with like 4 channels, but they took me into the TV room and they turned it on, and sure enough, this person's program was on. And my parents explained to me, this person has a show that a lot of people watch, and if you go on her show and you share your story, maybe more people will help with what you're trying to do. So I kind of understood a little bit of what it meant. That would have been 2001, and when this person broadcast their live talk show, Oprah Winfrey, I think at that point, over 200 million people around the world watched it live. So I kind of understood a little bit of what it meant. And then they called back the next day. And the same producer was interviewing me again to see if I was good enough to be on the show. I was talking to him on our kitchen phone. I remember my parents were across from me on the other side of the counter, just kind of pretending to make dinner, kind of listening. And I got to the point where he asked if I could come to Chicago to be on the show. And I said, "I'm sorry. I'm busy next Thursday." And I looked over at my mom, and I think I just said, "I'm busy." And my mom took a look at me, and her eyes got wide, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Let me talk to your parents." I covered the phone. I said I was not rude, but he wants me to come on Thursday. My mom let out a huge sigh and got on the phone and explained that I couldn't come to Chicago. I would have been in grade 4 that year, and that was the first year at my school where we could be something called peer helpers, so like volunteers at the school. And I signed a pledge at the beginning of the year saying that every Thursday I would be in the kindergarten yard helping the kindergartners with recess, with whoever was on duty for the staff. And I signed that commitment, saying my mom, who had always taught me about keeping my commitments, knew this and knew that I couldn't do anything on Thursday. So she got on the phone and explained that I could not come. She hung up. I ran away because I was in a little bit of trouble, but I like to think that looking back, is that I would make the same decision. Because what got me so far with the original Ryan's Well project in the first place is when the goal changed, when it wasn't what I signed up for, when all these grown-up things came in the way, how I felt stood the same. and I made a commitment and I made a goal. And if it would have been easy to rationalize things to stop what I was doing, but I made a commitment, and that was all that was important. And if I never kept it then, why would I keep it now? So my mom was distraught. I ran away, and then they called back 15 minutes later. And they said, Tuesday, will he come on Tuesday? So it all worked out, and I was able to go on this show. Yeah, I was a little cuter then, back in the day. And it was around that time when a whole bunch of different things happened. There was a documentary that was done about the original trip to Africa where I went, and they called it Ryan's Well, and it got released. There was the Oprah show, and it was the cover of a magazine people used to read called Reader's Digest. And it was this spark, and the people around me in my community who had been volunteering and helping thought it would be best to harness it and create a foundation to fundraise money for a couple of years while it was relevant and get some work done where we were trying to do. So it would have been, oh my gosh, that would have been 19 years ago now. And since those 19 years, we've been able to do over 1,400 water projects in 17 countries around the world, helping raising over $10 million, helping almost 1 million people get clean water. And I look back on, it would be, oh my gosh, almost 22 years ago now, on how everything started. And I think of that the hardest thing I had to do in any of it in the last 22 years. And I think the hardest thing I ever had to do was raise my hand in my grade 1 class. I wasn't a hand raiser, but when my teacher was talking about water, it found something that I was connected to, that I was passionate about. I couldn't stand the fact that kids my age didn't have what I thought was a given. And so I took a step to do something and ended up making a huge difference. And, along the way, I may have failed multiple times in the beginning, and it was tough, but at the same time, if I never raised my hand, none of that would have ever happened. I think that's a testament too, that you can look at problems a certain way. Because I was so young, because I thought that one well would bring the entire world clean water, I was certainly naive. But if I didn't have that, I would have never raised my hand. So I think one of my challenges to you all here today, it's important to grow up. It's important to establish skills, establish a perspective on the world, and to know that it's an evolving place and we need to have nuanced decision making. When it comes to that thing that you care about in your professional career, in your volunteer career, if you wanted to get involved in something, remember what it is you're passionate about. For me, it was water. For everyone else in this room, it could be something entirely different. But when you find that thing, think like a 6-year-old. Raise your hand and see where life takes you. So a little story along the way. When I went to Uganda for that very first time for that big celebration, afterwards I was invited to attend Gola Primary School for 2 weeks while I was there. And I was a little excited but also quite nervous because I was from a town in redneck rural Canada, and it was on the other side of the world, and I had never been to another school before, nevertheless Uganda. And I was nervous, but the year after I started fundraising in my grade 1 class, my grade 2 teacher heard about everything that happened and said, that's kind of neat, but why don't we expand on this and get pen pals at the school where the well was built? So like writing buddies. So we all got writing buddies, and my writing buddy ended up to be this kid named Jimmy Akana. And Jimmy, I got to meet him when I went to Uganda, and we hung out a lot. We became really good friends. And that was one thing about going to the school, is I was incredibly nervous. But, we went to class, learned, had recess, came home at the end of the day, hung out more with people around where I was staying. And by the end of the trip, I couldn't really tell my friends back home, apart from the friends I had that made there in Uganda. They were just kids who wanted to go to school and have fun and learn. And it was amazing to be a part of that, to know that no matter where we are in this world, we're a whole lot more similar than we like to think, especially when we're kids. But for Jimmy, he was at the school before the well was built and after the well was built. So before the well was built, Jimmy had the job of getting water for his family. So he used to have to get up very early in the morning to go get water, and then bring it home, and then he had the privilege to go to school. So Jimmy used to get up before the well was put in at midnight, and he had two big jerry cans that were almost 20 liters each, and he had to walk almost 5 kilometers for him to the nearest well, wait in line, fill them up, come back, and then do it again, and then do it one more time. And I like it when Jimmy tells the story, because then he would say, then I would have the privilege to go to school. And when I was a kid, going to school was not a privilege. It was something you just had to do. But after the well was put in, Jimmy was actually able to go to class and actually learn and participate and not have to fall asleep because he was exhausted all night from going and getting water. And he had a class of over 70 students, but after the well was put in, he was actually able to become the #1 student in his class. And because of that, and I was the well kid, they paired us together for pen pals. And so we were able to hang out a lot. We even had a sleepover one night, actually. I remember I had my Harry Potter book, and I was trying to show him, and he was like, this makes no sense. And we played cards and stuff like that. We became really good friends. And I actually learned on that trip, Jimmy was an orphan, but he was staying with his extended family, and he was fine. So I came back to Canada on my crusade to try to do as much work as I can and fundraise money. And Jimmy stayed in Uganda because he was fine. And then a couple of years later, in 2003, there was a lot of conflict going on where Jimmy was from. There was a rebel group called the Lord's Resistance Army who was fighting the government, and they were increasing their operations. And how they operated was they used to kidnap kids and conscript them into their army to fight. And the conflict was getting worse, and it got to the point where Jimmy's village was actually raided. And so Jimmy was taken along with several of his cousins. They were tying every recruit up. And then Jimmy, he chewed through the ropes that were tying his hands up. And when they weren't looking, he ran off into the bush. And they saw him escape. They shot at him. He ran into the woods, so in the bush that night, and he slept there. And then he came back to his village the next morning, and everything had been burned down. And the people that were left were upset with Jimmy because he pissed off the rebels by running away. And people said to him, it was very selfish of you to do that. And because you did that, the rebels were upset and they burned everything down, and we have nothing left, and it's your fault. So you're no longer welcome here. And Jimmy would have just turned 13 at the time. And, people had lost everything, but Jimmy was a kid. And we heard about this all through, this was back when the internet was just starting up pretty much. And we heard about this all through an email 2 weeks later from a man named Tom Omach who was helping us coordinate water projects in a different area. And my family was sending a couple bucks for Jimmy's education, but after we heard this in a quick email, we thought we were meant to do more. So through the craziest month of our lives, we were actually able to pull together enough stuff to get things together so Jimmy could come to Canada to attend a conference to share his story about water and things like that. And it was crazy, but we eventually got him to come over. And yeah. So he came to my school. It was the very end of my school, I remember. So I think we had like 3 weeks left. So he was in, what was it? I think he was in grade 7. So he attended my school, and it was a lot of fun. And he spent summer with my family. And it was then, because we had just heard this 2-week line email before, we found out more about what actually happened to Jimmy and that he wasn't safe going back and that people were actively looking for him. So from there, Jimmy was actually able, like we had a talk with my two brothers, my parents and I, and with Jimmy coming over, he felt like a part of our family that we didn't have, and that, you know, he had his perspective on life and how hard he worked at everything and how much he gave to the people around him and how much he cared. And we were actually able to adopt Jimmy. So he became a part of my family. He became my brother. And that was a long time ago now. He was actually in grade 8 when he came because he was 2 years above me. But then his English would have been his second language. So he was at about, they thought, like a grade 4 literacy level. But he wanted to go right into the grade he was supposed to be. So he went into grade 9, so high school. He worked his tailbone off, graduated from high school, got his marks up and everything, went to university out in Canada, got his degree in anthropology, realized he couldn't do too much with a degree in anthropology. So he ended up moving out to Western Canada, to a province called Alberta, and he's a welder and a pipe fitter out there. So he is the smart one in the family. He got married a couple of years ago. I kind of kept on growing over the years, and he kind of stuck the same. He got married to a Canadian girl from New Brunswick, and yeah, around almost a year ago, he had the birth of his son, so he's a father now. I was speaking out west, and I was able to meet up with him. But one of the craziest things I think about when I talk about Jimmy, and when he first got here, he came and he talked about his experience with water and fundraised and did a lot of volunteering. And one of the things that I remember my little brother in particular bothered him about so much when he came to Canada is he said to Jimmy, "Jimmy, you smile so much. You smile when you sleep. What is wrong with you?" And it was true. He smiled all the time. And I think going through life, having every excuse you could possibly have to be bitter and upset about the hand you're dealt and about how the world is an unfair, unforgiving place. And Jimmy just had the attitude of looking out for the people around him and moving forward, whether that was simply when he was a kid and going to get water for his family, or as an adult with the family he has now. And so when I think of giving back and having that tenacity, I think of Jimmy and his story. So I've grown up over the years. I'm no longer 6, I'm 28, and it's been a crazy adventure. I did a lot of volunteering when I was younger. I think there was one year where I gave over 150 presentations to schools and churches and all this kind of stuff, and then is able to create the Ryan Swell Foundation. We were originally a volunteer-run organization, and then we eventually got to a point where we got a little bigger and we had to hire professional staff when I was in high school. So I kept on volunteering. I went to university. My degree's in political science and international development. I worked a couple years. I was a delivery truck driver. I worked for an organization in the city of Ottawa getting young people involved in politics. And then the opportunity came 5 years ago to start working for Ryan's Well as the project coordinator. Our project coordinator kind of quit at the drop of a hat, and I had been involved volunteering. And it came to a point, I always thought that if you volunteer with something, it can't be a part of your professional life, and that it just wouldn't fit, it would lose some of its value or meaning. But the opportunity came, and it was a little bit uncomfortable at first, but I think I learned along the way that if you have the opportunity to combine what you do with what you care about, with your lifestyle, with your work, and you have that opportunity, you have to take it for everything it's worth. And those opportunities don't come up very often. So that's one of my advice to you guys again, is if you find that, don't shy away from it. Take it with both hands and see what happens. So ever since then, I've worked with the project work, a lot with fundraising, and about 6 months ago, I took over as executive director of the Ryan Swell Foundation, and it's been an incredible journey. There's a lot of things to learn along the way. When you talk about the world's water crisis in particular, it is not a simple thing. There's still major problems all over the world with millions, hundreds of millions of people who do not have access, and an even greater number that don't have access to sanitation. It's not only a matter of doing the work, it's making sure it goes to the right people, that the work is sustainable, and that it makes an impact for years to come. Those things don't just happen. It's not something that a 6-year-old necessarily has the expertise to do. And when you grow up
There's a greater level of accountability is that you need to grow and find those things. But you shouldn't let those things stop you from getting involved in the first place. It's okay to think like a 6-year-old, but grow up and just develop the tools you need to make a tangible difference. So I've never been happier with where I am right now. Yeah. So a story that I want to leave you here, guys, today with is a story when I heard when I was 8 years old. I was lucky enough to go on a television show called The Galloping Gourmet. Has anyone ever heard of it? One guy, or sorry, girl. Anyway, so those of you who don't know, it's a very old-time cooking show, and it was a chef from New Zealand, and his name was Graham Kerr, and he used to have a show called The Galloping Gourmet, and I think he wrote a book called The Gathering Circle, and he used to talk about, philosophy and how to be a good person and all that, and he was visiting Canada to Toronto, and he heard about my story, and he invited me to go on the show. And so I went on and got free food, and we sat down and talked, and it was all fun. But before I went on the show, he sat me down, and he drew me this picture, and he told me a story. He said, Ryan, in life, everyone has a cup and a saucer. It's like a teacup and a tea saucer kind of thing. And he told me that for much of his life, his cup was overflowing into a saucer. So he had way more than what he needed to live a happy life. And he told me that he kept on refilling his cup into a saucer until one day he realized that it made more sense to pour what he didn't need into somebody else's cup. So he changed his way of thinking, and he told me it made him a much happier man. So it's a simple way of saying, if you have more than what you need, you give back and you share with others. I think the tricky thing about that, it's all well and good, but the tricky thing about it is it's the easiest thing in the world to not realize when your cup is overflowing. To get caught up in the idea of all the things you want and all the things you need to be happy that you forget what you're passionate about. And I do it all the time. And I think it's just every once in a while you need to take a step back and rethink what you really do need in your cup to be happy and what you can give back to. And whether that's your professional career, your volunteering, whatever it is, if you find that opportunity, you can live a very fulfilling life and give back to what you care about too. It's not to say that you have to give your entire life to something, but find time for it. The most frustrating thing about all this, I think, growing up for me, maybe not frustrating, but just the interesting thing is, when I first started out, people used to discourage me, saying things like, wait till you're older, wait till you have more experience, wait till reasons not to do things. And I don't think any of those people were mean or, trying to put me down, but it may have been how it came across. But I made a commitment and I was going to follow it through. So I kept on going throughout that, despite the fact that I was Ryan, despite the fact I wanted to go home and play Super Smash Bros. With my brother on the weekends and sleep in. I still wanted to volunteer and do all this too. Because people saw that more than anything when I was a kid, when I was really young. And they said, oh, that's cute, you're trying to do this despite your being that person. And then when I was a little bit older, when I was maybe 11, 12, and the foundation was more successful and established, people looked at me a little bit differently. And they said, good job being an activist, good job being a role model for your peers, going above and beyond what any normal kid would do. And that made me more uncomfortable, because I wasn't any of those things either. I was just me. And it took me a long time to reconcile the fact that you don't need to be someone superhuman to make a big difference in the world. You can be ordinary and have an ordinary impact and have an ordinary life. It's okay to want things in your cup. We all want to be happy and move forward in life with everything, but that doesn't mean you need to sacrifice that with the things you care about. A long time ago, I was on a radio show. It was called CBC, Canadian Broadcast Corporation Radio, and they were doing a special segment on volunteers. And they were volunteering, or they're interviewing like a volunteer activist person from every generation. So someone who was 0 to 9, someone in their teens, 20s, 30s, all the way up to someone in their 90s. And I would have been the 9-year-old on the program. So They brought us all on, and they asked us the same questions, like why you do what you do, what motivates you, all this kind of stuff. And it was fun. But after they had finished all the sets of interviews, they found something really interesting. With the exception of myself and the teenager, everybody else who they interviewed, who was an activist, at some point in their life had gone through a mental breakdown, had gotten to the point where they were doing so much with what they cared about that they weren't thinking about themselves. They were oblivious to it, and it got to a point where they couldn't handle it. You don't have to give your entire life to something, but if you can find time, whether it be professionally or whatever it is, to give back to it and maintain the fact that it's okay to care about yourself, you never know what kind of impact you can have. Remember, the very first donation we ever got to Ryan's Well was a $20 check in the mail from a lady who lived a couple blocks away from me. And she still donates today. I remember I drew her like a thank you card, and I drew a picture. And she's still a part of why I do what I do. It wasn't something crazy. It was a little gesture that helped me going in the right way. And whether it was kids who I talked to who started their own initiatives caring about the environment or whatever it was, find those things and share your impact on them, share your footprint. And you never know where they'll lead or what story they'll end up with. If you were to say that my failed grade 1 school project would end up spanning over 2 decades and helping almost 1 million people in the world get clean water, I would have said you're crazy. Anyone would have. Instead, just act on things that you're passionate about, see where they take you, and you never know. Thank you so much.
My question for you is this. I have sisters, 6-year-old and 8-year-old.
Aww.
So my question for you is that you have a lot of perseverance and maturity as well as empathy since such an incredibly young age. So what do you think is that one thing in your environment which you grew up in which contributed to that growth? Is it at home or perhaps at school, or is it just you?
I don't think it was anything too special with myself. I think we all have, no matter what culture we're a part of, we always teach, our 6-year-olds about caring and giving back and sharing and fairness. I don't think it was some kind of special trait. I think it was just the thing that really helped it guided along is it would have been easy for my teacher to say, you don't understand, we're just doing this, like, just go along with what we're doing. Or it would have been easy for my mom. I remember the most important thing that she probably did actually is when I had the goal of $70 is she drew a thermometer and stuck it on the side of the fridge, 2, 4, 6, 8, all the way up to 70. And I got to color in another line every time I counted to 70. And I think it was just a matter of, people not dismissing me, but giving me tangible goals I could go towards. Not saying, okay, here's the $70, shut up. Or it was more they put the footsteps in front of me. And I think that's what we need to do with young people is they have the empathy all over the world. We just need to give them the steps to move forward in their own way. And I think it was just great I was able to have my mother and the teacher and the people in my life who gave me those steps. Yeah.
Thank you. All the best.
We'll now take one from
Hi,
Adam.
Ryan. Thank you for your excellent presentation. My name is Wu Bingxian from Wenzhou King University in China. I'd like to tell you that I read your story in my primary school textbook, so it's very nice to see you here.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
I think what you have done is really, impressive. And I'm curious about your future plans, so could you please tell more about that?
So our future plans, we have something called the Ryan's Well Foundation. We're a non-for-profit in Canada, and we have 3 full-time staff, 2 part-time, and we're a small organization, but we're able to raise a little bit over $1 million a year Canadian, and we support local projects on the ground in East Africa, West Africa, as well as we're in the 2nd year of a pilot project in Mexico, and our mandate is to still help the most needy people in the world with access to clean water, make the project sustainable, and keep on going. So every year we start the same kind of thing. We have to fundraise for the projects we do, And we have a plan, we have people who have supported us for years, and we try to get more supporters, and it's always a tug and pull. We make a budget, and it's almost like a business. You want to try to make sure you're showing people that their investment is making a tangible impact, and use that as a case to keep on going and moving forward. So it's, every year is an adventure, and it's always different, but we're just happy to still be here and keep on going. So just keep going forward, yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, thanks.
Just over to the left here, Ryan.
Hi Ryan, my name's Kabi, I'm from Malaysia, and first of all, thank you and congratulations for whatever you've done and whatever you're going to do. The question that I have is like, well, from yesterday, from service day, like one of the biggest things that I've learned from all the children is that children generally don't have any negativity, they just have that question of like, why not? And it reminded me of how I was when I was a child and, you know, the dreams that I had.
Yeah.
And like, for me, as I grew older, I was told many things by many people and I experienced many things that, you know, sort of like changed my perception of life as I went on. And, you know, I think I slowly sort of forgot about those dreams. So my question is like, have you ever felt at any time that you wanted to drop this? And how did you deal with it?
That's a really good question. I think, in short, yes. I think when I became a teenager especially, and I was waking up to the world that, you know, my dream, I always said when I was a kid, was to bring the entire world to clean water. And I was like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. And you wake up to the reality that that's a long ways off, and that even when you do a water project, there's no guarantee that it will last for a lifetime for people. It takes a lot of steps to make sure that the work's sustainable and all this, so I think there was times I got very discouraged and I became cynical, and it was tough. But I think what got me going through it is that it wasn't my project anymore. I had shared it with friends, family, people in my school community, and people all over the world attached themselves to the story. So when I put myself down, there were other people, part of the community, that helped bring me with it. Now it's a pleasure to have still a part of my life. But I think that's an important thing to remember. If you care about something, you can keep it to yourself, and that's fine. And you know, you can come and go with the trough that has its high and lows, and it's like that for anything. But if you want it to last and be persistent and grow, you need to share it. You need to share it with your coworkers, your family, your peers, your classmates, whatever it is, because that's the only way you establish, you know, talents that can come together and help cope with something. So I think that's my only advice, is we all are going to go through that, especially with these big causes that we like to tackle, and it's just a matter of saying, you know, that we can collectively combat it. So that would be my advice, to share it as much as you can.
Thank you, all the best.
Thanks.
Good morning, Ryan. My name is also Ryan, and I'm from the Maldives. You started the project at the age of 7. One thing that really reminded me of is that even young people can really make a huge change. I have attended a lot of volunteer camps back in my country, in the Maldives. And one thing that I have learned is that one of the major factors that keep a project going is networks, building networks with like-minded people and different NGOs. So how did you really, build such a network at a very young age, at an age as young as 7?
Yeah, it was tough. It didn't happen overnight. It's easy to kind of fast forward and say, oh, and 20 years later we have all the success. No, it was a lot of the little things, because, you know, I have 2 working just class parents, and I'm from a small town, and I didn't really have an established network at all. I think the important thing that I did when I first started out, I'd say a few things, is I spoke to anyone who would listen to me, to try to share what I was passionate about and be sincere and authentic and share that, and I think that people really respond to that. And I think the other thing is, like I was talking a bit ago about that lady who gave that $20 donation, and, you know, I took the time, and for I think the first like 5 years of when I started fundraising, anyone who ever sent a donation, I do a handwritten thank you card, and I always drew a picture. It was like the worst picture ever. I put like a sun and clouds and like grass and like water. That matters. You need to take the time to say thank you. You need to take the time to establish those things. Nothing's a given, and you have to earn that respect, and you have to earn, you know, it's one thing to say there's so many worthy causes and charitable endeavors over the years, so why would Ryan's Well be more, you know, deserving of that than X? You can't just assume. You have to prove that. You have to prove that with your work. And we're lucky where we have, you know, the story that we've been able to build, and that hasn't happened by accident. It's just been a lot of hard work kind of thing. So just to keep on making a case for support and sharing it with like-minded people and doing the hard work. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. Over this way.
Hi there, Ryan. I'd just like to personally thank you because throughout my life, I would learnt about you in primary school, and sorry, and you were kind of the reason and the metric that I would use to make sure that I was doing the right thing throughout my life. So I just want to thank you so much. You've inspired me to put my hand up for so many things. Additionally, I just want to very quickly acknowledge the pun that you made halfway through the thing that nobody laughed at when you said when you went to northern Uganda to see the well, and everybody was so pumped. Oh, hilarious. I don't know if you'd meant to, but that was fantastic. I'll ask a question that's relatively quick. You said you wanted, $70 was your first goal, and then $2,000 was your next goal, and then the next goal was to provide the entire world with clean water, but that one is, from a realist perspective, not, well, potentially possible in the future, but yeah. I just wanted to know what your goal is now.
Thanks for everything. I didn't actually know that was a pun until now. Now I'm never going to be able to say that again. But every year we establish new goals, and we're at the point now where we're doing some 3-year-long projects kind of thing. But it's hard. It's you have a certain element of uncertainty because you have to start over in essence every year. We're not hoarding money or anything. We're doing the fundraising and we do the project work as we do it kind of thing. So it could change from year to year, and that was the entire reason. Like when we started the Ryan's Well Foundation, the entire idea is while this is relevant, while this is popular, let's do some work and then close it up at the end of the day. Because in theory, when you're reliant on networks to establish a board of directors, volunteers, donors, supporters, you have to assume there's going to be an element of burnout with that. But we've just been able to grow it and let the project work speak for itself, and it's been able to keep people engaged. So I think we're really lucky to be where we are, but it hasn't been by accident. We need to keep on doing those things and set our new goals every year and keep on making sure it's better and better. Yeah. But thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Ryan. My name is Divya, and I'm from Queensland University of Technology, Brisbane, Australia. Thank you so much for such a wonderful speech. I think the things I'm going to take away from you, and I think I'm sure a lot of people in this room are going to take away, is the fact that you're so humble, grounded, and at the same time, you've not lost the essence of that childhood dream. It's important not to lose that sense of wonder. So thank you so much for reinstilling that into our hearts. It resonated with so many of us at so many different levels. I work for 2 non-for-profits that support 2 different causes, and my question to you is, what are some of the funding strategies that Ryan's Wells project use, that can be sustained going into the future? Like if you can just highlight on some of the points, that'll be really good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just speaking a little bit before about, you're treating a donation almost like an investment, and you want to make sure that people see the value in what they're doing and prove that in different ways. Like I think we've kind of been lucky with Ryan's Well. We've had that narrative, and I was talking with a few other speakers about this morning. It's important to have a story and have a narrative of why people want to get connected, and we've been lucky to have that bridge through like media and publications, and then they come along to the project work, and I think that's what keeps people engaged, is you want to have that story to open the door, give them a reason why to connect to, but that's not going to keep them engaged forever. So I think you need to really boast the specifics. It's one thing, and it's one thing that we need to get better at as well. It's one thing to say, okay, we've raised this much money, we've done this many projects. It's another thing to say, okay, how many kids are going to school that weren't before? How many people aren't going to the clinic? What are the numbers on typhoid and malaria in the areas that you've done work in? Those are important things to say. What's the difference between an area that we've done a lot of work in compared to an area that has had no intervention? You don't want to ever assume that what you're doing is just inherently good. You don't want to get caught in a bubble, and you want to keep on proving that to yourself as well as to your donors, and that's the only way people are going to stay engaged. So I think that's a trap that maybe I've fallen into once or twice too, to assume. You can't assume that, oh, it's just on the other side of the world we have these big water problems. No, in my country of Canada, we still have 200 Indigenous Peoples Reserves that don't have are under boil water advisories. We're dealing with big, huge issues with water in terms of privatization. Is water a human right or is it responsibility? There's lots of really nuanced discussions that we need to have a focus on and not just be blind to. So I think one of the best things we do is just we're at the element now where it's not about the story anymore. That's how you start. You need that level of professionalism and to prove it, and you should feel empowered by that opportunity. I think that's the best way to say it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning to you, Ryan. My name is Iskra. I'm from Peru, but I'm here with UQ Oxfam. I want to truly thank you for being so open and speaking from your heart. Now, my question to you is, how has vulnerability played a role in the path that you have chosen in life? Thank you.
For myself or for...
For yourself.
Oh, no. I don't know.
If at all.
Like, I was always very introverted. I think I still am an introverted person, and I had a real problem, especially when I was young and I started speaking when I was a kid, like sharing that story, because you want to make sure you're sharing, what you care about and what you're sincere about. But it felt almost contradictory to me, especially, like I would have named that original assignment Ryan's Well, and then the original well was called Ryan's Well, and the foundation's called Ryan's Well, and I've always felt a level of uncomfortableness with it all, because ever since it wasn't me doing chores, it was, a community of people. But people have always attached to that story, and I can still speak to that story and generate support. So, but yeah, but it's still a level of uncomfortableness, and I think it's not necessarily important that it's not that I'm reluctant, but at the same time, I think it's important to have a level of awareness that you realize that problems are bigger than in one person, and that the foundations that I've been a part of is you can have a role in empowering voice, and sometimes you need to elevate yourself in a role that you may not see for yourself, but you can adapt. So I've learned to be a little bit of a better speaker over the years and connect to people and talk more and be more extroverted, because was the path for success kind of thing. It wasn't something that I originally ever saw myself doing, and it took a long time to get there, but it's nothing that you can't learn along the way. And I think that's important. Like, we all have skills and attributes that we know we're good at, but it's always important to keep on expanding that, expand your comfort zone. I never saw myself being someone who could speak and do these things all these years later, but it turns out that's extremely powerful to have. So not use your vulnerabilities as a crux not to do something, but, to use them as a strength. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Unfortunately, guys, we only have time for 2 more questions on either podium. Again, I am so sorry if you aren't able to contribute this time, but please do contribute throughout the rest of the sessions. Thank you. Take it from the left.
Hi, my name's Jasmine. I'm from Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. Over the last couple of days, we've heard a lot of stories that have been challenging and inspiring at the same time, much like your own. My question is, when you go into communities to implement your program and then you go home, what practical ideas do you implement to kind of get out of the paralysis and like the stunned experiences that you have to go home and ignite the fire and the passion again to, continue on with your work rather than being all stunned by the experience that you've had, if that makes sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think one of the most important things is to, it's not necessarily Ryan's Well. You need to share the stories of local people who this is affecting, and you want to empower them to have control, to take control. So one of the biggest things that when we do a project is you want to make sure it's not the government or Ryan's Well that owns that water point, it's that community, that they have a part in establishing bylaws and how it works, how it operates, who uses it, if there's fees collected, those fees can go to, all those things. And you want to make sure that that's established, and that's incredibly important, or else it's not going to go anywhere. And I think for me, if this is what you meant by your question, is that, it's a thrill to be involved and engaged, and, stories are always adapting. Everyone's got a new one, and you know, when we're doing our work, and you just want to make sure you're staying connected, staying grounded, and keeping things going. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, kind of. I just like, you know, when you go home and you feel like you're so impacted by the story, and like Geraldine was saying, she has a gin and tonic to like calm down, and you know,
that sounds like a good idea.
Just practical ideas and like guidance and advice about what you do.
No, that's okay. So I remember when I first came back from that first trip to Uganda, I was, you know, distraught almost because it was a big sense of culture shock, and that I was coming back to my town in Kempville, and that, you know, it was completely not like that at all on the other side of the world. But I think one of the things that I found with it is you just connect to, you know, the fact that we're all kind of the same at the end of the day, and connect to that and not differentiate it, and just keep on, you know, finding that balance. It's okay to enjoy a gin and tonic. But I probably shouldn't have done that. But it's okay to want things for yourself. It's okay to have that sense of peace and go back and not feel guilty about it, because there's amazing world that we live in today where we have opportunities that we've never had to before to be connected to other things, but also for ourselves. And you want to make sure you keep on caring about yourself, because, you know, if you don't care for yourself, you can't assume someone else will. So you want to do that, and then that's the only way you're going to be able to be the best of yourself helping people. So what Geraldine said yesterday, I would absolutely agree with 100%. You need to find that time and make it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for your inspiring speech. And another two aspects is you changed my impression on my primary textbook. Before today, I thought it was fabled. It's just the story. The teacher wants us to be kind, to be nice to other people. But it's a real figure. It's a real story. Thank you. And you changed my personality to be nice and to be kind to other people. I'm doing volunteer work. And my question is, several days ago, I was in Tibet, a plateau in China, and people there are not that rich, and I taught the kids there about their culture. And my question is, it's just like a short-term job. We just can do it in my summer vacation. So how to establish a long-term system to balance our daily life? I'm a student in university because we've got so much work and study stuff to do, and with the volunteer work, how to establish that. And you know, in China, the process to establishing an NGO is very difficult, somewhat. So how to solve this kind of question?
No, that's a really good question, and something, you know, I think I look at it as, you know, we develop tools and skills throughout our life. When you're younger, maybe you have more enthusiasm and more time and energy to do something like go and spend 3 weeks and do something like that. And then as we get older, we develop different skills. We go to university, become engineers, lawyers, teachers, and we have a different skill set. I think it's just a matter of knowing that feeling that you have when you go and you do that 3 weeks, and then having that transfer to your later adult life, and that knowing that you don't have to get rid of that, you just need to transfer it, whether that's continue volunteering for an initiative that you care about, being a board member on something that you care about, fundraising, spreading awareness. There's so many things that we can do that can be pertaining to your skill set. And I think that's one of the things. I remember I was in China a long time ago on Central China TV, I think in 2005, when I was a little younger. And there was this big, I remember we had someone asked me a question about volunteerism. And I think volunteerism in China then was like, what? Why would you do something and not get paid? Like, I don't understand. Like, it was a very foreign concept. I think we just need to understand that there's different ways to give back to the community, and volunteering and being a part of something is an amazing way to express something that you care about in your professional career or private with something. So I think just volunteering in general, like, we need to grow as a society to accept and embrace it. Yeah.
So another more,
No,
sorry,
please.
it's like we've done the job as to sell the postcards and bookmarks with the local elements we designed by ourselves. So sell it to people to raise money, but it seems like a little work compared to so large population suffering from this kind of poverty or clean water.
I hear what you're saying, but
so,
it's not.
So how to
It's the awareness. That's how I started. My first fundraiser, I was doing chores for 50 cents around my house. Like that would have never, it's the baby steps. It's that leading into something. It's creating awareness. It's making an impact on someone else who may have bought that postcard, and it goes beyond that initial donation they do. You change their perspective. You changed how they look at it maybe. So you can't look at it just as, okay, we raise this much money and that's the only impact we have. It goes beyond that for so many things. I think that's important to take account. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been thinking about the problem of clean water for quite a while, actually. And I remember seeing a statistic that 5,000 children die every single day from drinking dirty water, which is, you can't even wrap your head around it, especially because that's just children under 5. Who knows how many human beings are dying every single day from this. So, I mean, I hear that when these wells are built, if they break down, the locals don't really have the tools or the means to fix them and repair them. If you could speak to that, like if that's been a problem for you, how you've overcome it. But really, I just wanted some advice. I'm a student of construction and media production. The best way I've thought of to tackle this problem is to focus on infrastructure development and figure out a way to make a sustainable business model out of it that can somehow provide the locals with the training and the resources to build these wells themselves. So yeah, just any advice on some direction to take, something to focus my efforts on, you know, some kind of masters or volunteering at an NGO, anything. I've got some ideas.
No, that's fantastic. I remember the figure used to be 6,000 kids die every day because they don't have access to clean water. So at least it's come better in different ways, even though the population's gone up. The other thing is, it's not just necessarily, people talk a lot, especially in the water field, they say, oh, there's no silver bullet solution for doing things. And for us, it's a matter of making sure that it's community ownership, that they have ownership over the well. They have bylaws that are established by them that are done with guidance, but you know, they control how much, who uses the well, how it's operated, and things like that. For the technology, there's a lot of new technologies that are trying to figure out like a better way to pump water, to get water to a certain source. And I think one of the most complicated things where you run into certain things is people get too complex with the technology. So if you're ever developing something with infrastructure, you want to make sure that it's simple and that it can be fixed with local, you know, parts kind of thing. And that's one of the biggest things is there'll be these huge complicated like $10,000 projects and they break and they're not able to be fixed. Where we do our work, we train a certain number of pump mechanics in each district where we do work in. And we also make sure that we establish with the communities that we're doing the work with, that they raise a certain number. So for a community, for instance, that will have 15 households using the well, like each month, we recommend that they give, like in Uganda, 1,000 shillings to the well fund, which is like 25 cents, but it's still an investment. But things are going to go wrong with wells. You're going to need to clean them. You're going to need to replace nuts and bolts. You're going to need to replace the tubing every so often. And those are things that aren't necessary. That's just how it works, having a water source. So it's just a matter of putting the steps in place so that when something does go wrong, that people have the tools to be able to fix it. Another, like I've said, water is a responsibility a lot up here because it's not just a given. There was a time, I remember in the 90s, they did a big study on internationally, like water aid specifically. And they found that within a year, about 80% of water projects done didn't work within a year. And it's gotten better since then, but it's still a grotesque statistic. And because when you think about doing something like a well, it's something permanent. It's going to last for a long time and make a consistent aid. So we do a look back campaign ourselves, where we look back 5 and 10 years after we've done the work. We look to 60 to 80% of the work that we've done and see what's going well, what communities are doing differently. Sometimes it's communities doing things that we never expected. There was one community that was at, we did well in 2003, and they've had to replace the piping, like the concrete's almost gone, but the well's still working. And one of the things that they found is they're selling some of the water to the prison down the road, something that we'd never anticipated for, but that community made that decision, and they've been able to make that as part of helping keeping the well going. And it's just, you can't always plan for people. So if you're developing something like technology, my biggest piece of advice is to make it simple, make it something that can be fixed on site. And you know, we use basic infrastructure kind of thing because that's probably the biggest reason in it, but that's not to say that it's perfect the way it is and nothing needs to be changed. There's lots of technologies that hopefully will come out to help improve things, but you know, it's just getting there. And there's lots of different pathways, lots of different things, so we'll wait and see, yeah.
Okay, cool. Is that look back information available for the public?
Yep, we have our on our website. We have active projects and completed projects, and we have a lot of it on there. And then if you wanted to send me an email to my contact information is on our website, and I can share with you more about what we're doing, kind of thing.
Okay, thanks. That'd be great, man. Cheers, man.
Yeah, cheers. Okay.
Thanks so much.